マイクです。有声音，听得到。
I look at that and it's all blank, and yours is filled, so it's intimidating, sort of, you know? Yeah, so here's the first thing you should do when you open up GameMaker Studio. You should create a blank project. It's going to be completely empty, right? Once you create a blank project, and there's nothing in it, right? It'll just be blank space like this. Go and look on Google and say, how do I make a character move in GameMaker Studio? That's the first step. The second one is to find your folder called Objects and right-click on it and say Create Object. And what you've done is you've created your first item, the first thing that goes in the game, right? Like, I have these objects that are like, oh, it's the lamp, and, you know, it does all this stuff, whatever it's going to be, right? Whatever the lamp is going to be. That is specifically one of these objects. You can make basically an unlimited amount of them. I think there's like a few thousand in Heartbound of this. I look at that, it's all blank.
Stop using text-to-speech.
Have you ever wondered why some people can make money so effortlessly in the stock market? Well,
Fast, the character.
Global interest rates expected to drop? Want to outthink the market for potential gain?
Builds, or maybe you watch a basic tutorial for some different type of game, like platformer from someone else. Then you can go on to make. Check here. We're going to use GameMaker language, and then we need to name our project. Very. Cool RPG. Exude confidence. And we're in. Okay, so first things first, on the right here, we have the asset browser, which is where all of the assets for your game are going to be and organized. The first thing that we're going to do, we're just going to jump right in, and we are going to make a sprite to represent the player. So we click on sprites, we right click, go to the create menu, which brings a drop down, and create a sprite asset. Everyone has their own kind of naming conventions for stuff. The way I generally do it is by doing SPR underscore and then whatever I want to name it. So I would call this SPR underscore player. You'll probably see different people do different stuff. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you're consistent with yourself. Okay, so let's click down here on this first frame so we can open up the editor. Now, the default size for sprites are generally going to be like a 64 pixels wide and 64 pixels tall. You see down here. Let's go ahead and resize this to a 16 by 16. So we can go to the top here to image, and then go to resize all frames, resize canvas, and then 16 times 16. And apply that. So good. We have a good little square now. We have a good sized square now. So let's just fill this in with the color. I'm going to pick this beautiful red. And this is our player now. And that's it. That's all we got to do here. So exit out. We now have this sprite asset here. Pretty cool. And we really don't need to do anything else here either. So it's done. Now sprites are just images, even if they're full animations, that's all they are. They don't actually run any code. That's all objects that actually run code and make your game a game. So let's make an object for our player as well. So let's right click on it the same way, go to create, and this time we're going to create an object. Now I name my objects obj underscore, and then whatever it is I need to name it. Again, just stay consistent with whatever it is, just as long as you know what's going on. That's what's important. So the first thing we're going to do with our object is go into this little drop-down menu for the sprites, open up our sprite folder, and then assign our player sprite to our player object. Alright, cool. Now we have an object. We have a player. It won't do anything. There's no code. But we'll get to that in a second. So now we can close out of this. We have a sprite. We have an object. And the final thing we're looking at for this little basics are the rooms. There should already be one here. So let's open that up. And this is it. So this big black box is your room where you can put your different objects and stuff. Over here you have your layers. Instances are what you would also call objects. So this is a layer where you can place your objects. The background is currently this big square here. And let's just go ahead and put our player into that instance layer. So to do that, you highlight the layer that you want to place things on. Then you go over to your resource tree, highlight the thing you want to put down. It has to be the correct type of asset. And then as you hover over the room, you can hold the Alt key, and then you can place an object wherever you want to. Let's put it up here on the top left for a second, because after we place this in, well, now it's in the room. which is great. But now that we've placed this, something we need to do is we're going to resize our room. It's very big right now. So on the bottom left, we're going to do a couple different things. So the first thing here, you have the width of the room and the height of the room. Let's go ahead and set that to 288 wide and 216 high. So now our room is a much more reasonable size compared to our player. Let's continue on to viewports and cameras, which is very, very important. This is how wide and how tall the view in pixels of your game is going to be. And essentially how big the window is going to be whenever you run the game. That's the viewport. So let's enable our viewports. We'll go to viewport 0. Make it visible. We'll turn it on. You'll see here it just appeared. This border is huge because it defaulted to the same size as the room whenever it started. So for our camera, we are going to do it with those same values that we made the width and the height of the room, which is 288 pixels wide and 216 pixels tall. This is a 4:3 ratio. You're probably going to either want to do a 4:3 ratio or a 16:9 ratio. It really doesn't matter. I would say just go ahead and do what I'm doing here just to make it a little bit easier, and I just thought this was kind of, if you're wondering where these numbers came from, I just thought they kind of looked cool. I like this resolution. But yeah, so our viewport, we are not going to want to make it exactly the same size as our camera because the viewport is how many pixels on our actual display the window will be taking up. So if we made that 288 by 216, the size of our window would be this literal size right here, which would be very, very tiny. So for a viewport, what you're going to want to do is multiply the camera size by just some whole number. I like to do it with this by 3, so 864 by 648. This is how it works for mine. I have a 1080p monitor, so if you have like a 4K monitor, it's probably still going to show up really small. So just know that you take these numbers and you multiply them by the same whole number to make it bigger. Otherwise, you're going to get weird scaling, and the pixels won't be the same size as each other and stuff like that. So, yeah, okay. So,
it's 6.4.
right now we can actually run the game because we've fixed our camera, we've fixed the viewport, and we've put an object in the room here. So let's see what we've done. Not much. No, but seriously, this is pretty cool. So you've run a game, and you did it. You can't. It's not fun at all because you can't do anything with it. Let's rectify that right now. So close out of this. We'll go back to our workspace. We can go ahead and close out of our room. We don't need it right now. And let's go back to our player object. So now we are going to start adding code, finally. I'm going to minimize that just so we have a little bit more room. Alright, okay, so we're back to the player object. Here we have the event window, and events are the actual places where code is run. So let's add an event. we're going to add our create event. And a create event is, so all of the code that we would add here will run at the moment this object is created in the game. A lot of times you'll use the create event to initialize your own variables. And we're going to do that right now. So we can get rid of this commented code. We are going to make two variables that will represent the speed our player can go left and right and up and down. So I'll show you what I mean. So first, let's call this x speed equals 0. So this is how you would set a variable. You type in whatever you want that variable to be equals whatever value you want it to be, and then end with a semicolon. A variable is just a... So let's add an event. We're going to add our create event, and a create event is, so all of the code that we would add here will run at the moment this object is created in the game. A lot of times you will use the create event to initialize your own variables, and we're going to do that right now. So we can get rid of this commented code. We are going to make two variables that will represent the speed our player can go left and right and up and down. So I'll show you what I mean. So first, let's call this x speed equals 0. So this is how you would set a variable. You type in whatever you want that variable to be equals whatever value you want it to be, and then end with a semicolon. A variable is just a string of letters. It could be anything that you want it to be, as long as it's not some built-in function or constant or whatever in GameMaker. And it will turn blue, which means that, yes, I initialized this. I created this variable called xSpeed. And anytime I reference xSpeed after this in my code, GameMaker will know that xSpeed means 0. And I can also change the value of it. I'll show you how this all plays in a second. So this is just, know that this is just how you would set up a variable. So let's set up the variable ySpeed as well. So we're going to be using these two variables to determine how fast the character will move left and right for the x value and up and down for the y value. And we're going to set one more variable here, and we're just going to call that move speed, and we will set that to 1. Okay, now that we've set those up, we can close our create event. We're done with it for now, and we can add another event, and this is the step event. So, like I said, the create event only happens at the beginning of the creation of this object. It runs once. It's generally for initializing things, starting things up. The step event runs every single frame of the game. So the step event is mostly what you're going to use to actually do things in your game. So let's get rid of this code, and we're going to do our first function. So I'm actually just going to type this out, and then I'll explain how it all works. So we're going to say write key equals keyboard check vk write.
Right key go to keyboard check.
And semicolon. So as you can tell, we're actually initializing another variable again. You know what that is, so I'll explain this. Keyboard check is a function. Functions are this orangey yellow, and basically they return values based on what you're feeding them. So what this function is doing is it's checking your keyboard for a specific button being pressed. This red value here is a constant in GameMaker, which means that it's a variable that has already been built into GameMaker. It already has a value. And this one specifically, VK represents the right arrow button on a keyboard, virtual key right. So this function as a whole is checking to see if the right arrow key is being pressed. If it is being pressed, keyboard check returns the value of 1, and if it is not being pressed, it returns the value of 0, which basically means that the value of the variable right key that we created is dependent on whether or not the right arrow key is being pressed. If it is, right key equals 1. If it isn't, right key equals 0. So let's do this for the other directions really quick. Okay, so now we have variables that hold the value for if you're pressing right, left, up, or down on your keyboard. We're going to be using this to figure out the movement of the character, which direction they should be going, the speed they're going, all that kind of stuff. You may be wondering, I said that you'll generally be initializing variables in the create event. You can do it anywhere. You can, as you can tell, you can do it anywhere as long as you're never referencing a variable you haven't set before you've set it, because then GameMaker doesn't understand. So it doesn't have to be in the create event. Generally, it's a good idea to do it, but this is fine right here. So let's use some of the other variables that we set up with these to actually move the character. So, as I said before, X speed is the speed at which our character moves left and right. And here's how we're going to calculate that. So we're going to say X speed equals right key minus left key. All right. We can move this down a little bit. So basically what this is saying is this is taking the values of the right key being pressed and the left key being pressed, and it's using them in a way that should calculate the direction we're going on our X speed. So what that means is if I'm pressing the right button and not pressing the left button, right is going to be 1, the left button is going to be 0, so that will be 1 minus 0, our X speed equals 1. If we're pressing the left button and not pressing the right button, right key would be 0 minus left key, which would be 1, so that would equal out to -1, which means if you are adding -1 to an X value, it would actually be going backwards, so it would be going left. This also ensures that if we're pressing both the right and the left key, then it'll equal out to 0 and your character won't move. This isn't finished though. This would work how it is, but we set this movement speed variable. So basically what we need to do is we need to add parentheses around these two. So we're taking this value that I was just talking about, and then we're going to multiply it with a little star here, multiply it times our move speed. If you're an astute math student, you'll know that this actually doesn't change anything because this value is still only being multiplied by 1. But basically what this means is setting it up this way, if we wanted to change the speed our character moved at, if we wanted to say our character movement speed wanted to be 2, then now the same code is running, but it just is calculating properly how fast we want to go left and right. So that's why this is set up the way it is. So take this back to 1 because 1 is a nice number, and we're going to do the same thing with the Y speed, but don't just copy and paste this like exactly like I'm about to do. Hold on. Basically what we're going to do, actually, you know what, no, I'm going to type it out so we don't get confused here. So let's go ahead and add our parentheses here. Now the way Y values work in GameMaker is actually probably the opposite of what you would expect. So if you are going up this way to the top of the screen, the Y values actually go down, and if you are going this direction to the bottom of the screen, the Y values actually go up. All that being said, what we're going to need to do is, because going to the bottom of the screen needs to be added, we're going to start with down key, the down key value subtracted by the not pressing the Y speed will. So let's do the speed. We have set changing our own variables. So now that we have determined what our X speed and Y speed currently are based on what buttons are being pressed, we can just add them to the built-in X and y values of the objects. So you see x is green there because that is a built-in variable for the objects in the game. So we could have x plus equals x speed. So this is how you would add something to a value. This is completely identical to, say, doing something like x equals x plus x speed. These mean exactly the same thing. Every step of the game, this value will be added to x. Either of these mean the same thing. This is just the more proper way to do it. It's a little bit less redundant, and it's just how you change values like that. So let's do the same thing with y plus equals y speed. So now we are determining our button presses here, if a button is being pressed and which buttons are being pressed. Then based on those, we are calculating the speeds at which it should be going left and right or up and down. And then we are actually adding those new values to our object here, which means that it will move around the room. So we can actually just run that right now. We have our room over here. The player is already in here. So we can actually go up and run our game now and have our player move around a little bit. And hey, look at that. All right. Okay, cool. So we're not done yet. We got one more thing to do, and we are going to add walls for our player to run into, you know.
Ooh.
Like a big old goofball. All right, so let's get out of here. You know what? Actually, before we do the we make the walls, I want to show you. Let's change our move speed to 10. Let's actually use this bad boy. Let's see what that does. Alright, that was fun. Anyways, let's get back to the walls. Okay, so we can go ahead and exit out of our room. We can get rid of the player object right now. Now we need to make a new sprite. Everything from here on is stuff that we've already done, so just with a couple extra bells and whistles. But let's make a new sprite. Done this. Go to the right click, go to the create, make sprite. Click on this first frame. We'll do the same thing here that we... did with the player, we'll resize the frame to a 16 by 16, and we can make the walls this pretty blue, and that's pretty easy. Oh, I forgot to rename it. So we can exit out here. We can rename it right now. SPR_wall. Easy peasy. Let's go over one thing I didn't with the player sprite. So up on top here, you can see there's this little point. This shows where the origin of the sprite is. They always start in the top left for new sprites. You can do this drop-down menu. It'll let you change where it needs to go. You can change the values manually here. You can drag it around. For our wall, we are going to keep it in the top left, but I'm going to go ahead and cover this now since it's, you know, it'll come into play at some point. And then this bottom left menu down here is called the collision mask. Collision masks are what objects use to check for collisions. That's pretty self-explanatory. There are certain functions in GameMaker that will check if objects are colliding with each other, and their mask is determined by the sprite that they have. So this one right now is the whole image. There you can have it automatically generated. You can make it be the full image, which would be the same thing here, or you can do it manually. And I'll just do this just to show you that, see, this is how it kind of works. You can move it around. We want it to be the full image right now, so, you know, we can keep everything how it would be. This is just important for actually making sure that the player runs into the walls properly. And we could do the same thing, check the player sprite really quick. It should be exactly the same. It should be this whole thing. If I go into manual, I can see that it is this full square. But just keep this in mind, because down the road, this is something important to note. Alright, now, let's make another object for our wall. So create, go down to object, name this one thing I didn't with the player sprite. So up on the top here, you can see there's this little point. Blue. And that's pretty easy. Oh, I forgot to rename it. So we can exit out. You can do it. Check into our step event, because remember that runs every single. Name this obj wall, and then open our sprite folder and take the wall sprite. Awesome thing about the way we're doing walls here is this wall actually doesn't have to run any code at all. The interaction with the wall and the player is going to be totally done in the player object. So we're actually just done with this. So let's go back to the player, into our step event, because remember that runs every single frame of the game, and whenever we're checking for things like collisions, when the player can move and stuff. We're going to need to check it every single frame. Okay, so we're learning a new function right now, and we're gonna put this new code right in between getting our X and Y speed and actually adding our x and y speed. And you'll see why that is in a second. So here's another little trick too. If you put 2 forward slashes, you can create a comment in your code, which it's not code at all. It's literally just something that you can use to mark stuff for yourself. So we'll comment this out and we will say this is the collisions. Again, I'm just going to type all this out and then I'll explain it step by step afterwards. Okay, so we have a new function and our first if statement. So an if statement basically just means whenever you write if like this and you as if all of this like it is except you have. So here it's looking for an x position, a y position, and an object to check for a collision. To be x and y value of the object that's calling it, so the player, but we are checking the player's x value plus the x speed that we've gotten here. The x speed has not been added yet. We're checking before we get to that point. If there is a wall in the way, then we're going to change our x speed back to 0, which means that it will not go forward anymore, and it won't run into the wall, and it won't get stuck in the wall. So pretty simple. Let's also do it for the y value. You're setting the y speed value. Back to 0. If you have some issues, you might have accidentally put x speed on one of these. One more instance. Opening up our room here, we can go back to the instances layer because we're adding more instances now. We are adding a wall. So if you remember, you just have to hover around here and hold Alt, and you can place walls. So let's just place a couple around here.
รู้แล้ว
Exit out. We now have this arguments to do anything in programming. Hold Alt 1 and you can just drag it if you want. That collision mask that we were talking about will scale with this thing right here. So this is totally fine to do. You can place them individually. It's probably better to have less objects all over the screen or whatever, but you know, it doesn't really matter. You're probably going to be... It doesn't matter. Okay, well, we have the walls here. So let's run the game and see if we run into everything all right. Right, here we go. And if you just kind of happen to find... Hello there! Welcome to part 1 of this series. These part 1s are going to focus on making a player move overall. We'll just set that to 1. Speed equals, and to make sure that's going in the our player. So back in our player step event, here, and to do that, there's a free demo. This video is going to focus on turning our little red block into a fully fledged cool player character thing. To show you how this works. So I'm going to make a little arrow here. And now I'm going to go up to these frames. I'm going to copy this frame and paste it so we have 2. So we actually have an animation here. And I'm going to move this arrow up. And maybe in the other frame. I'm going to move this arrow up. So it's almost like little feet. And I put these arrows facing down because this is in the place of our little character sprite. Facing down whenever you actually get around to animating something, you know? So let's go open up this little tab here, which dictates the animation speed, because right now it is at 30 frames a second, which is going to be very fast. So let's set this to something like maybe 4. Yeah, that's pretty good. all depends on what your final animation is, but this is pretty cool. So we can exit out of this. It's just placeholder right now. Let's make 3 more player sprites. One for facing the right. One for facing upwards, and one for players. And right click, faster to do. So I'm gonna make this one sprite player. Our image all frames anti-clock. Clockwise, which will
Oh, yeah, I removed the videos quite some time ago. Well, I did kinda sold my account, and now looking back at it, it's kinda cringe. Sure. I remember the college days. Good old college days. I was in university a few months back. Now I'm working. Yeah, I saw video, and now I got a life and a wife.
will make it turn to the right. Okay, like I said, this is just placeholder stuff, so it doesn't really matter. So you can go ahead and do the same basic thing for sprite player up and sprite player left. Okay, so now we have our 4 player sprites. Let's go to script.
Good old days. 8 hours a day.
Right here is setting up some macros, which are just going to be our own constants, variables that we can reference anytime. We'll need it. Script in GameMaker Studio 2.3, all essentially run at the beginning of the game.
Function script 1.
By themselves, so we can get rid of this, and we can say macro right 0.
Just turn on YouTube and you are online. Just wanted to say I really like your video content. Good luck every day. Oh, that's nice of you. Thanks. You too. Good luck with life.
So we're making a macro. We're
Bye.
making constant. See, it turned red here. And we're going to make this all caps just so it's easy to not accidentally name another variable like this. This will be the only thing that we name like this. So we're going to do a macro for right. We're going to do a macro for up. And we're going to do
0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is
as numbers on a circle graph going from the right being 0 and then going counterclockwise, up being 1, left being 2, down being 3. And that should be it. We can also rename this script and just call it script macros, just so we know that that's where we set all that stuff. So now we can go back into our player object. We can go back into the create event and add some variables that will help us figure out which way the player should be facing and animating and all that stuff. We're going to add a new variable type called an array, and this is what that looks like. So this is what an array looks like. You see it turn blue here, like a normal variable. So it's a variable with brackets, and it starts with 0, and it goes up. It basically means that you can have a variable with the same name, but a bunch of different values in it, so you can reference them easily, and you'll see why this is advantageous. So our
right is 0 degree. Up is 180 for down.
our first behavior that we can change this sprite, we can do sprite here.
Right. Left. Down.
Sprite bracket 1, sprite bracket 2, sprite bracket 3. This is just a much more clear way of figuring out what we're doing here. The way the character, we can set this to down, since normally whenever you run your game the first time, whenever you want it to show up, you probably want your character facing the camera. Let's start putting this stuff into motion. So let's go back to our step event, and we can go ahead and add this at the bottom here. We will say set sprite. So here we can say sprite index, which is the sprite that our player will have shown currently, equals sprite face. So we have this face variable telling us which way we're facing, and dependent on what that variable is, it will set our sprite to the correct thing. So if our face is down, like it is here, our sprite will be set to determine what direction we actually are facing. So here is a super simple way to do that. Let's go above this line here, and we will say if our x speed is greater than 0, which means if we're moving to the right, then we can say face equals right. Easy. And we can do the same thing with left. So if our x speed is less than 0, we can set our face to left. So now if we're moving to the right, the game will figure out that we're facing the right.
More than 0. Lesser than 0 to the left. Down is a number, so more than down.
And then it will set our sprite to the right player sprite. Pretty cool. So we can do that with y speed as well. So let's say if our y speed is greater than 0, remember that means we're actually going down. So that would be our face equals down. And we can say if our y speed is less than 0, we're going up. So we should be facing up. Okay, let's test that out real quick. So we've started, and our player is facing down like they should be. So if we move to the left, yep.
Ooh. Try. Wait, why do I need to fuck now? Fuck it out. Oh, X speed now. I fucked that. Try again.
Move up, we move right. If we start moving diagonally, the sprite might change in kind of a weird way. So right now, if we're moving to the right and we press down or up, this happens where it just keeps flopping around. And the same thing happens if we move left. And that is because the order, let's go ahead and exit out of that. That is because the order that we're doing this. So even if we're moving right, once we press left, down, or up, it will run the code in that order. 0. This is how you would write is equal to, not y speed equals 0. We're saying if it is equal to 0. This would still work if you just had 1, but it's a much better practice. go ahead and do 2 and know that if you're using if statements or whatever, that's just the way to do it. But anyways, what this is going to do is, as long as we are not moving up and down, the game will say, okay, we can go ahead and set it to our left and right. And we can do the exact same thing over here by saying if our x speed is equal to 0. Whichever direction we started moving first, once we move in a diagonal, our sprite won't just change. Still, I shouldn't have put all these reports in. Yeah. Yeah. Looky there. Easy.
After finding the Chi Man manifestation, people always ask me why I was so lucky.
Okay, so a quick thing I just realized that's an issue. Right now, if our player goes from not moving to moving at like a diagonal in the opposite direction at the same time, then these sprites don't change properly. But that's okay, there's an easy fix for this. So I've isolated the code out here, and we're just going to add a couple lines that fix this. So right here, let's add if our x speed is greater than 0, which means
See.
we'd be moving to the right, and our face is equal to left. Then we're going to run some code here. This double and symbol basically just means that both of these statements need to be true to execute this code. It can be written like this, but in general, in coding, you're going to see it written like this. So this basically just means if this, also if this. So anyways, so if we are moving to the right and we're facing the left, we can just switch the face back to the right. Easy. We can do the same thing with the left. So we can just copy this. We can say now, if our x speed is less than 0, which means we're moving to the left, but we're facing the right, let's switch our face back to the left. We can do the same thing with the y speeds. Just remember that the y speeds, again, work where the bottom of the screen is the higher number, which would mean if our y speed is greater than 0, we should be going down. So if the y speed is greater than 0 and we're facing up, we should just make ourselves face down, and we can do the exact same thing here. So the y speed is less than 0 and we're facing down, we'll go up. There's a lot of just similar looking variables hanging out around here, so just pay attention to make sure you're getting all of this correct. So let's see here. Yep. Seems to work. just fine. And it works exactly the same normally, so if I'm moving right and I go up and right, I stay that way. And oh yeah. Okay. Now this is undeniably a little duct tapey, just a little bit. Having the player move in 8 directions but only face 4 directions requires a little bit of a finesse, I guess. Well anyways, in the rest of the video, if you see me go back through the player stuff, this block of code is going to be what it was before, not this new one. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to be long before I leap back from the future and interject on myself again for something I did wrong with the sprites. But don't worry, it's the only other time.
So Sean, you like to invest, you are also into fitness. What do you think is the commonality between these two?
Oh yeah. Character faces the right way. I got a right, up, left, and down. You can tell the animations are pretty simple, but that's not a problem. Feel free to copy these or make your own, do whatever you want to do. There's just a couple things we need to check now that we're making more complex sprites. So I'm going to go into the down player sprite, and I'm going to stop this from animating. Go back to our first frame, look at everything. So let's talk about origin points. This right here is the origin of the player, and this is where the player's X and Y point. Will be. You need to make sure that all of your sprites have their origin points at basically the same spot logically. So what I mean is I've put the origin between the feet of the player on all the sprites here. So here, here, and here. And you can actually see that on our right and up sprites, this ends up being the origin is at 7 pixels in, 20 pixels down. And over here, it's 9. So these values don't have to be the same. They just have to be kind of on the same pivot point. If your origins are just kind of haphazardly put wherever, like maybe this one is at the top left of the image, maybe this one's like over here, maybe this one's still in between the feet, and this one's over here or whatever. When you turn your player, you're going to get some absolutely wacky results. So for me, I always like to put them in between the player's feet. I think that's a pretty good place to put them, and it just makes sense. Then we need to check our collision mask. So go over to the collision mask. You see, I've already set mine where I want it to be. I want it to kind of be this area, so this will be where the player actually collides with walls and stuff. Much like the origin point, the collision mask needs to be very consistent between all the sprites. But if you end up adding a lot of sprites, or you have a bunch of different directions, or maybe your player turns 8 directions, it can be pretty difficult to keep track of every single collision mask in every single sprite for your player. Maybe you've made a bunch of sprites and then you decide, actually I want it to be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. Then you'll have to manually go into all of them. In a little bit, I show you a super easy way to manage these. So for now, just worry about setting your sprite player down to the collision mask size that you want. Now I know I said prettier sprites was all that there was left to do, but I did actually forget to do one thing. The player doesn't actually stop animating whenever they aren't moving. Super simple fix for this. I'm going to exit out of these, and then we can hop back into our player object. So let's add a bit down here, and we'll call it animate. And basically the only conditions we're going to set here, we're going to say if our X speed is 0, and if our Y speed is 0, we can make sure our image index always sets back to the first frame of the animation, which is 0. Let's run our game and see what we got. So right away you can see that my little character is not animating, which is perfect. So let's see if we move to the left. move to the right. Yeah, looking pretty good. We run into everything okay. Actually, here is the other thing we have to do. So you see, if I move to the right and I move here and I try and move down or up, my character isn't moving. What we're going to do is we are going to set our collision mask to always be the player down sprite. And we can do that very, very easily. So, in our setting our sprite, we can just come up here and we can say mask index is, yeah, looking pretty good. And we run into everything okay. Actually, here is the other thing we have to do. So you see, if I move to the right and I move here and I try and move down or up, my character isn't moving. What we're going to do is we are going to set our collision mask to always be the player down sprite. And we can do that very, very easily. So, in our setting our sprite, we can just come up here, equal. So, now no matter what our actual sprite is, the collision for our player will always be drawing from our down-facing sprite, which means no matter how you change this, how you edit this, how you move it around, whatever, it will always be fine. You won't get any weird stuff like getting stuck. This should fix everything. So, let's check. Let's see here. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, looking good. Perfect. I just realized something that needs to be fixed. So, this code right here is totally fine, but where we have it is actually causing a little issue. So, allow me to demonstrate. First of all, yeah, talk about a glow up, but let me show you what this problem is. So, if I'm against a wall like this and facing to the left, if I press down, the player won't actually turn down because the Y speed is being set to 0 and changing the sprite depends on what our speeds are. So, to fix this, it is extremely simple. If we take all of this code here, so I'm going to Control X to cut it, and we put it before the collisions, now the character's sprite will change basically based on our input. Input, and the collisions will still be fine. Like so. Okay, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to go. Alright, catch you later. Okay, yeah, this is the way. Now but where we have it, talk about a glow up, if I press down, the player won't actually turn down because the Y speed is being set to 0 and changing the sprite sprite depends on what our speeds are. So, to fix this, it is extremely basically based on our input, and the collisions will still be fine. Like so. Okay, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to go. Alright, catch you later. Let's make another new sprite. Down here. And we can call this sprite house tiles. So I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to turn our grid on, which will show us a 16 by 16 grid. The way tile sets work is that they pull from a sprite, and they will pull it in blocks. So each one of these things will be a different tile that we will be able to pick up.
Hey yo. Hey. Welcome.
In place in our room. Tile sets always start with their first tile blank, so we can just go ahead and discard this one. In fact, a lot of times I like to just put a red block there or something like that, just so I know not to that this is uncharted territory. I don't belong here. This is going to end up being a very tiny tile set. I'm going to end up importing another one that I worked on before. I'll show you that one, but right now I'm just going to walk you through making one yourself, the kind of ideas you might want to put into it. So first, let's say the background color that we want to do is maybe not a black, but maybe like a very dark color. Let's do like a kind of darkish purple. We'll put this here to have that. Now we want to make a tile where we can make, we'll say this is the walls, and let's do a color. Let's do this nice pink. This will be very similar to the one that I imported, and I'll show you that one so you can copy it if you want to. So that's a really basic tile set. Let's get out of here. Now we actually need to create the tile set asset. This is currently just a sprite, and so to make the tile set, we can exit out of here, go over to our tile sets folder, right click, create an asset, go down to tile set. Surprise, surprise. So, here we can select our sprite, go into the sprite folder, select this right here. Everything here should be set up perfectly fine. You can change a lot of the properties. go down to tile set. Surprise, surprise. So here we can select our sprite, go into the sprite folder, select this right here. Everything here should be set up perfectly fine. You can change a lot of the properties of it, like how wide and tall you want the actual tiles to be, but everything should be perfect for us right now. So we can actually exit out of this. Oh, actually, let's name it. We'll name this TS House Tiles, or just TS House, whatever. Whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. So we can go back into our room, and over here the only two layers we have is an instance layer for our objects, and we have a background layer which is just this black box here. So let's go to the bottom of this box here, and we can add a new tile layer, and now we have a tile layer. It's under the instance layer currently, which is what we want. You can into our instance layer for our objects, and we have a background layer which is just this black box here. So let's go to the bottom of this box here, and we can add a new tile layer, and now we have a tile layer. It's under the instance layer currently, which is what we want. You can move tile layers around. You can move all layers around like this, but we're going to keep it under the instances because we don't want it to show up on top of the player. So we click on tile layer, go down here to the tile layer properties, select the tile set we want to use, and now we can place stuff around. So I'm going to start with our dark color, our wall color. So I'm just going to use this square tool, fill it up. Could have used a little paint can, but I didn't. Sue me. Let's go to the pen so I can select one at a time. And actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's go back to our instance layer. And we can just go ahead and get rid of these walls. So I'm just holding shift and dragging to select multiple things at once, and then just the delete key. So back to our tile layer. I can now add tiles where I want. I can draw them in. So let's make this let's make a little room here. Very tiny room, and we'll have a little path that goes into another little tiny room. We can use these to outline this to make it look a little bit nicer. So now you see kind of what the point of how tile sets work. You probably knew that already, but I said. Set it anyways. Okay, so this looks a little nicer. It's still pretty plain, but whatever. We can go back to our... Actually, we need to add some walls back in. But before we do that, we can go back to our workspace and open up our wall object. So right now, it is checked as visible, which means when the game runs, it will actually show up. If we uncheck this, then our walls will not actually show up whenever we run the game, which is what we want now that we have a tile set that shows us where the walls are and stuff. We don't necessarily want these big blue walls to just show up on their own. So let's do this. Let's actually add another instance layer, and we will call this walls. The benefit of having this on a separate layer is that whenever we are done placing our walls, we can turn the layer invisible ourselves anyways, just so it's not mucking up the view. So let's go back to our assets up here. Grab our object wall. I'm going to turn this grid back on so that way our walls are snapping properly. And I'm going to outline this room with our walls. Okay, so I placed all my walls here, and now I can just turn this layer invisible, so it's not bothering me. They're still going to be there, it's just not visible to me in the editor, and they won't be visible when you run the game. Another little thing you can do that would actually probably be really helpful is what I always do. In our walls, even if we can hide them like this, it's still kind of weird having them to be completely opaque and cover up the screen. Either pick a color here. We could go to the layer that it's on. And turn down the opacity. We can make it see-through. It's about maybe like half or a little bit less, it doesn't matter. As long as it's a little see-through, that helps. So, you see this way, if I'm putting a wall somewhere... if I'm putting a wall anywhere in the room, you can still see through it, which is very helpful. So let's hide this layer again, and run the game and see how everything's doing. Okay, so... looking good! Looking good! Okay, but this is still a little bit boring just because it's such a small little area here and the camera doesn't move because the room is too tiny. So let's make the camera follow the player so that way we can make a little bit bigger room. Let's exit out of here. We can go ahead and make our room a little bit bigger. So we'll go back to the room properties, which I minimized down here. So bring that back up. You can resize any of these windows by clicking between them. And now, let's change the width to, let's just say like 500 by 400. So now we have all this space to work with. Exit out of here. Looking good. Okay, but this is still a little bit boring just because it's such a small little area here and the camera doesn't move because the room is too tiny. So let's make the camera follow the player so that way we can make a little bit bigger room. Let's exit out of here. We can go ahead and make our room a little bit bigger. So we'll go back to the room properties, which I minimized down here. So bring that back up. You can resize any of these windows by clicking between them. And now, let's change the width to, let's just say like 500 by 400. So now we have all this space to work with. I can close the room settings. I might want to make a new little tile path here. So back into our viewports and cameras. Go back to our viewport 0 that we set everything up in the beginning. And in the beginning, you probably noticed this object following. So we can select any object here for the camera to follow, and obviously we want to select our player. Horizontal border and vertical border basically mean how far does the object that the camera is following, how far does that have to be from the edge of the camera to move it. So 32 and 32 would basically mean that the camera only starts following the player once the player is about this far away from the camera, and then it'll go with it. And we don't want that. We want it to stay centered on the player. So really, we could just make that half of our camera view, 144, and and 108. Now you could just set these to like 1,000 or something, and it would be the same thing. So horizontal and vertical speed, just keeping them at -1 means that it's just going to be following the player as fast as the player is going. So we're good. Let's close out of that. And before I forget, let's open up our walls again. And I'm going to get this wall out of the way because I actually want to move down here. Okay, all done. So hide this again and run the game one more time. All right, moment of truth. Hey, look at that. The camera's following everything. When we get to the edge of the room, the camera doesn't go any farther than the room is. So perfect. Alright. Okay, so this is the tile set that I'm going to be using from now on. If you want to pause and copy it or whatever, you totally can. If you're wondering why I didn't just link a folder that has the assets in it for you to download, I was too lazy. But really, more than anything, it's good practice to just imitate stuff that you see. Just copy it. You can change it however you want. You can change colors. It doesn't even have to be like this. This is actually a pretty inefficient tile set. You see all these spaces that I've left. It's because I made it really fast and I didn't plan it out very well. But regardless, if you want to use it, you totally can. Well, before I forget to mention, in tile sets, once you have started using them, GameMaker counts it as like tile 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So basically what happens is if you resize a tile set sprite after it's already in use, then what's going to happen is that order is going to get all out of whack, and your tiles are just going to show up in the totally wrong places. You can always make your sprite taller, but you can never make it wider. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I've kind of gone back and used my new tile set, and you can kind of see what I did here, which is like the darkest color is sort of just the outside of the rooms, and then there's the light.
Hey yo, Aurora. Sup? Making a game just for fun. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But I have no one to do the art. I can do the logics, but I need someone to draw the art. I'm gonna find someone. Just for fun.
Lighter dark color, which is kind of like the walls a little bit. It's just on the right side. Now we got a little bit of elevation going on. We can add a door here for our room, and then maybe a little little carpet thing in the middle of this. Got a picture frame. Put a couple of those on the wall. Look at that! Look how much stuff you can do with just tiles, and how cool it looks. And then once you just put your walls back around, then you have something pretty good looking. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna make some other objects, like maybe a dresser, maybe a walk in front.
As a VFX artist, my world can be
The most important thing for this is just a new sprite that you might want to make. So I've added in a couple that I've already made. So for example, I have a bed here. Just a very simple bed, just 2 colors. So let's right click, parents and children work in terms of GameMaker. This will work out totally perfectly. So if we go back to our room, I'm going to close our bed sprite here. We can go back to our room. Negative B box. What is drawn on means number increase. Have to run ever change. It will always be like before. We can still walk behind our bed. And now we can walk in front. Okay, so in this video we're going to make some room transitions. We're going to be able to move between different rooms in our game, which is pretty great, and we're going to do a cool little transition effect. Okay, so moving between rooms and creating new ones. So let's go over to our room folder. Since we're going to have more than one room now, let's go ahead and rename this one. This one is decidedly my living room. So I'm going to name it RM_living room. And that's perfect. And now we can create a new one. Create room. And we can go ahead and call this one RM_bedroom.
Something like a door. Okay, 绘画完了。 X.
So an important thing to note here is actually, if we go up into this quick access folder, you'll see there is something labeled room order, which what this means is this is the order in which the rooms will appear in the game. So the first one on top here is always going to be the one the game starts in. So even though down here, bedroom is on top, up here is where you would want to change the order. So if you want to start in the bedroom, you could just drag it above. Now the game will start in the bedroom. So we can go ahead and leave this here because we're going to, here in the bottom left, to the same 8 by 216. And our viewport was,
I need to find the best way to learn math and science.
It's brilliant.org.
864 by 648. And we need to make sure that the camera is following the player object and that our speeds, or our borders, are half the width and the height of the camera, or just a super high number. Now for this room, this actually isn't going to be super important because I'm going to make this room the same size as our view. So that way the camera just stays totally stable. But it's good practice to just do this in every room in case you resize it or whatever. So I'm going to decorate this really quick. So I'm going to add my tile layer, and I'm going to add my tiles. Go down here in the tile layers, select my tile set, my house tile set. Then I'm going to get a little funky. Then I'm going to add some of my objects, and then I'm going to add a new instance layer for the walls again. Okay, so if we run this again, we'll start the game in our little room, because up here, it's the top in the room order. Okay, so now we have 2 fully functioning rooms. Now we just got to figure out how to move between them. So let's get out of here, close out of this, and we'll get back to our workspace. So let's make a new sprite. We're doing another good old 16 by 16 pixel square. I'm going to make it this bright green, and I'm going to turn this opacity down on this layer a bunch. So we're going to name this new thing, this is going to be Sprite Warp Block. Okay, so let's make a new object. We are making object. Warp block. Set the sprite the same. And now we're going to make a create event here. So basically what we need to do to actually move the player between 2 rooms is we have to change the room that we're in, obviously, and we need to move our player to the correct X and Y coordinate of the new room. So let's set up some variables to do all that stuff. So we can have a target X, we can have a target Y, and we can have a target RM for target room. Now these zeros are obviously just temporary. We don't always want this to be where the player ends up, and I'll show you how we're going to set this for each one of these warp blocks in a minute. First, let's go to our step event. So we want to set this up to where once the player touches a warp block that we put down, the player will go to these correct coordinates and this room. So if
Alright.
the player ends up, and I'll show you how we're going to set this for each one of these warp blocks in a minute. First, let's go to our step event. So we want to set this up to where once the player touches a warp block that we put down, the player will go to these correct coordinates and this room. So if place meeting our X and Y coordinate with the object player, now place meeting is being called to the block, so it's saying if the player touches me, let's run this code. So the first thing we want to do is use this function called room go to. And what we're going to put in there is our target room. So whenever we set this target room variable, this function will take us there. The next thing we need to do is get the player's X and Y coordinate correct. So to do that, we're going to say object player dot X equals target X. By doing this, by putting like an object name down and then putting dot, you can reference any variable that object has initialized, which includes all the built-in ones like x. So this will just immediately be sending the player's x coordinate to this point. And if we do the exact same thing with the y values, now the player will go exactly where we need him to go. So now, how do we set these variables for each individual warp block that we need to put down? I will show you. So let's exit out of here, and let's open up both the bedroom, and we can open up the living room. We can swap between them up here. First, I'm gonna get rid of the grid so our objects won't snap around. Let's go to our instances layer.
Hey, hello, welcome. Are you gonna draw me something? Còn有冇financial？
Highlighted the warp block, and now we're going to put the warp block down. So let's put it right here. This is about where we would want it to be. So in the room editor, if you double click this object, I've already showed you this menu and we messed around with the frames. There's also this little thing here called creation code. If you click on this, it opens up a little code window, and what instance creation code does from the room is it is code that you can add to every individual instance of any object, and it will run immediately after. It won't, so our objects won't snap around. Let's go to our instances layer. Highlighted the warp block, and now we're going to put the warp block down. So let's put it right here. This is about where we would want it to be. So in the room editor, if you double click this object, I've already showed you this menu. I'm going to get rid of the grid so our objects won't snap around. And now we're going to put the warp block down. So let's put it right here, this is about where we would want it to be. So in the room editor, if you double click this object window, and what immediately or initially what we create event, now we can just tacking on more creation event. So essentially what we can do, if we go to edit object, it'll open up our events here. We go to our create event. Now we can take these variables, I'm going to copy them. We can put them in our instance creation. Event. And now if we set these variables, they will be specific to this object, and it won't make every single version of the original object do the exact same thing. Now we need to figure out what X, what Y, and what room do we want to go to. Well, we know we want to send the player to the living room, so let's go room, living room. So that's correct, and now we need the right X and Y coordinates. And to do that, we can just go into our living room. But one thing we actually need to do, we don't want to have two versions of the player walking around. So we can go ahead and get rid of this. We just need to have the player
What is 93?
in the first room that runs the game. So let's just get rid of that. So now we're right here. So if you look down here, this will show you the exact X and Y point you are in the room where your mouse is. So if and we can write. So let's see for the X. That works out how I. Okay, I forgot something. Okay, so. Wait a minute. Okay, I forgot something very important. Let's go back into our player object. Now over here, we have a little checkbox called persistent. And if you read the text that just showed up, this will make it so this object will persist between rooms. So that means that the game won't get rid of it whenever you walk out of that room. So now if we run our code,
So small. Hold on. The one block. Ooh, it worked. Nice. Okay, now I need the same thing, going back into the room. Oh, one block in the blocks. Read. On the block. Yeah. Okay, click on the block. Means jump. Okay, target room equal to room. X and Y. Come into the bedroom, it should be here. 128, 163. Okay, now let's give this a try. I can go out. I can come back in. I'm not again.
Okay, there we go. Now we can move between rooms. But there's obviously a couple things going on here. First of all, it's pretty abrupt to just kind of pop into the next room. And on top of that, there's another issue, which let me rerun this really quick. It may be kind of hard to notice just because it's so instant, but this won't necessarily make our player face the right way. If I walk in with the right sprite, it starts facing the right. We want the player to be facing downwards. So, let's fix a bunch of this stuff.
I think I know the issue. Here. Running again. And come out. I'm not going back. On touch, I'm moving back to the position.
Now first, we're just going to fix the transition. Take a new sprite.
That was a big pain. For most people, you'll think immediately, okay, how
Do like a transition. Same thing. Okay, so I'll leave this first bit. Won't show up here because the object we're just going to call object, and I just need to draw myself. So now that we have, and we can do that literally by just saying image speed equals negative and on here. It's just here. Like they compile to object once it's done. It is room is another built-in, and room just returns whatever room another than 1. So x1, it's below 1, and that's where our whenever we run into our work, we will be setting it at an appropriate depth. That's very important for this. We are just negative 999. If the player is where is it? Is touching this warp block, every single frame that the player is touching it is going to create one of these warp objects. And we do not want that. So we're going to do one more check. So we're going to say if the players run into this block and not instance exists object warp. So a couple new things here. Instance exists is just a function that checks if there is
10:30 from here tomorrow or the weekends. If I can save open. Save. Yes. Just in case, save project. Okay. Now open new game file. Alright, nice. Alright, that's it. Bye.